My name is Sarah, and I'm a 28-year-old graphic designer living in Austin, Texas. Austin is supposed to be this haven for creative types, a place where individuality is celebrated and dreams can take flight. And for a while, it was. I loved the vibrant music scene, the quirky food trucks, and the general feeling that anything was possible. I had a decent job at a small design firm, a cozy little apartment with a balcony overlooking a park, and a close circle of friends. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. I felt like I was finally finding my footing, carving out a space for myself in the world. I was, in a word, content. That was until Mark entered the picture. Mark was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. He was charming, confident, and incredibly handsome. We met at a gallery opening, and I was instantly drawn to his easy smile and witty conversation. He was an entrepreneur, he told me, working on some revolutionary tech startup that was going to change the world. He painted a picture of a future filled with excitement, adventure, and success, and I eagerly bought into it. We started dating, and it was a whirlwind romance. He showered me with attention, took me to fancy restaurants, and whisked me away for weekend getaways. It felt like a fairy tale. He quickly integrated himself into my life, charming my friends and family. Everyone loved him, and I was convinced I had found the one. Looking back, the red flags were there from the beginning, but I was too blinded by infatuation to see them. There were the subtle jabs at my work, the way he would dismiss my opinions, and the increasing control he exerted over my time. But I brushed them off as mere quirks, attributing them to his strong personality and ambitious nature. Then, a few months into our relationship, he started talking about merging our finances. He claimed it would simplify things, make us a stronger team. He presented it as a sign of commitment, a natural step in our relationship. Naively, I agreed. I opened a joint bank account and deposited a significant portion of my savings, trusting him implicitly. That was the beginning of the end. Once our finances were intertwined, Mark's behavior changed drastically. The charming prince vanished, replaced by a demanding and controlling tyrant. He started criticizing everything I did, from the way I dressed to the food I cooked. He would constantly belittle my work, telling me it was amateurish and uninspired. He isolated me from my friends, claiming they were a bad influence and didn't understand our relationship. He manipulated me into quitting my job, convincing me that I should focus on supporting his career. He said my skills could be better used helping him with his revolutionary startup. I was so emotionally dependent on him that I didn't question his motives. I was trapped in a cycle of abuse, constantly walking on eggshells, desperately trying to please him. And the money. It started disappearing, little by little at first, then in larger and larger chunks. When I questioned him, he would become defensive and accusatory, claiming I didn't trust him or understand the pressures of running a business. He gaslit me, making me feel like I was crazy for even asking. I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong, but I was too afraid to confront him. I was ashamed of what my life had become. I was a shell of my former self, isolated, broke, and completely dependent on a man who clearly didn't care about me. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of his control. One evening, after a particularly brutal argument, I finally reached my breaking point. He had spent the last of our savings on some investment opportunity, leaving us with nothing. When I confronted him, he exploded, yelling and screaming, telling me I was worthless and ungrateful. He even shoved me against the wall. That was the moment I realized I had to get out. I knew if I stayed any longer, he would destroy me completely. But I was terrified. I had no money, no job, and no support system. I felt utterly alone. How would I escape? Where would I go? I spent the next few days secretly plotting my escape. I knew I had to be careful, that any wrong move could provoke him and make things even worse. I started gathering my important documents, stashing them away in a hidden compartment in my purse. I contacted a few of my old friends, cautiously hinting at my situation, hoping they would offer help. But I was met with awkward silence and vague excuses. They had all bought into Mark's charm, and they couldn't believe that he would ever do anything to hurt me. I was on my own. As I was secretly planning my escape, a strange woman started appearing in my life. She seemed to materialize out of nowhere, always there when I needed her most. I first noticed her at the grocery store. I was struggling to pay for my meager groceries with the few dollars I had left when she stepped in and paid the remaining balance. She just smiled and said, "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." I thanked her profusely, but she just waved it off and disappeared before I could even ask her name. The next day, I was walking home from a fruitless job interview, feeling utterly defeated. I sat down on a park bench, tears streaming down my face. And there she was again, sitting beside me. She didn't say anything, just offered me a tissue and a comforting smile. After a few minutes, I started telling her about my situation, pouring out my heart to this complete stranger. She listened patiently, without judgment, and offered words of encouragement and support. She told me I was strong and capable, that I deserved better than what I was going through. Her words gave me a glimmer of hope, a renewed sense of determination. As the days passed, this mysterious woman continued to appear in my life, offering help and guidance. She helped me find a temporary job, a small, dingy office cleaning gig that barely paid enough to cover my expenses. But it was a start. She also connected me with a lawyer who offered to help me with my case pro bono, recognizing the signs of abuse and financial exploitation. The lawyer assured me that I had grounds to sue Mark for financial abuse and reclaim my stolen savings. But she warned me that it would be a long and difficult battle. With the help of this stranger and the lawyer, I finally gathered the courage to leave Mark. I packed a small bag with my essential belongings and slipped out of the apartment while he was at work. I left a note, telling him I was done, that I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I ended up at a women's shelter, a safe haven for victims of domestic abuse. It was a far cry from the comfortable life I had once known, but it was safe. I spent my days working at the cleaning job, meeting with my lawyer, and trying to rebuild my life. It was a slow and painful process, but I was determined to heal and reclaim my independence. Mark, of course, didn't take my departure well. He bombarded me with calls and texts, begging me to come back, promising to change. But I refused to listen. I had finally seen him for who he truly was, a manipulative and abusive con man. When his pleas failed, he turned to threats. He threatened to ruin my reputation, to expose my dirty secrets, to make my life a living hell. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had found my strength, and I was ready to fight back. My lawyer filed a restraining order against him, preventing him from contacting me or coming near me. She also started building a case against him, gathering evidence of his financial abuse and manipulation. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to bring him to justice. As I was rebuilding my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this mysterious woman was somehow orchestrating everything. Her appearances were too convenient, her help too perfectly timed. I started to suspect that she knew more than she was letting on. One day, I decided to confront her. I found her sitting on our usual park bench, feeding the pigeons. I sat down beside her and took a deep breath. "I know you've been helping me," I said, "and I'm incredibly grateful, but I need to know who you are and why you're doing this." She smiled knowingly. "My name is Alina," she said, "and I've been watching Mark for a long time." She then revealed a shocking secret. She explained that she was an investigator for a private organization that tracked down and exposed financial predators like Mark. They had been investigating him for months, suspecting him of running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that targeted vulnerable women. I was just one of his many victims. Alina had intervened in my life to protect me, to help me escape his clutches and bring him to justice. She had orchestrated the job, the lawyer, and the restraining order, all behind the scenes. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that my life had become a real-life crime drama. I was both grateful and terrified. Grateful for Alina's help, but terrified of what Mark was capable of. With Alina's help, my lawyer was able to build an airtight case against Mark. We presented evidence of his financial abuse, his manipulation, and his Ponzi scheme. The judge was appalled by his behavior and issued a warrant for his arrest. Mark was apprehended a few days later, trying to flee the country with a suitcase full of stolen money. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and abuse. The trial was a media circus. Mark tried to portray himself as a victim, claiming I was a vindictive ex-girlfriend trying to ruin his life. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury didn't buy it. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to a long prison term. I was relieved and vindicated. I had finally gotten justice for what he had done to me. But the scars of the abuse ran deep. It took years of therapy to heal from the emotional trauma and regain my self-confidence. I eventually went back to graphic design, finding a fulfilling job at a company that valued my skills and treated me with respect. I rebuilt my relationships with my friends and family, who had finally realized the truth about Mark. I learned to trust my instincts and to stand up for myself. I vowed to never again let anyone control or manipulate me. As for Alina, she became a mentor and a friend. She taught me how to recognize the signs of abuse and how to protect myself from predators. She also introduced me to the organization she worked for, and I started volunteering my time to help other victims of financial abuse. I wanted to use my experience to make a difference in the world, to prevent others from suffering the same fate as I had. One day, Alina approached me with a proposition. She told me that the organization was looking for someone to head up a new initiative focused on educating women about financial literacy and abuse prevention. She thought I would be perfect for the job. I was hesitant at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready to relive my trauma on a daily basis, but Alina convinced me that it was the best way to heal and to make a real impact. I accepted the position, and it changed my life. I dedicated myself to educating women about their financial rights, teaching them how to spot the red flags of abuse, and empowering them to take control of their lives. I traveled around the country, giving workshops and presentations, sharing my story and inspiring others to break free from toxic relationships. I became an advocate for victims of abuse, fighting for stronger laws and better resources. I found purpose in my pain, using my experience to help others heal and thrive. Years later, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial empowerment. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the audience, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had come a long way from the broken and defeated woman who had once been trapped in Mark's web of deceit. I had rebuilt my life, found my voice, and dedicated myself to helping others. After my speech, a woman approached me. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. She smiled and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I studied her face for a moment, and then it hit me. It was Mark's ex-wife. She had been one of the many women he had conned and abused before he met me. She had contacted me after the trial, thanking me for bringing him to justice. We had stayed in touch, sharing our stories and supporting each other through our healing journeys. She had remarried and was now running a successful business, helping other women escape abusive relationships. As we were talking, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She said that Mark had been released from prison on parole and had disappeared. No one knew where he was. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I knew that he would come after me. He wouldn't be able to let go of his obsession with me. I contacted Alina and the organization, warning them about Mark's release. They assured me that they would do everything they could to protect me. They put me in touch with a security firm and helped me reinforce my home security. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. I knew that Mark was cunning and resourceful. He would find a way to get to me. I started having nightmares. I would dream about him stalking me, breaking into my house, and hurting me. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid to go out alone. I knew I couldn't live like this. I had to take action. I decided to track him down myself. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't wait for him to find me. I hired a private investigator to help me locate him. It took months, but finally we got a lead. He was living under an assumed name in a small town in Arizona, working as a used car salesman. I knew I had to confront him. I couldn't let him continue to prey on innocent women. I flew to Arizona and found his car dealership. I parked across the street and watched him for hours. He looked older and more weathered, but his eyes still held that familiar glint of malice. I steeled myself and walked across the street. I walked into the dealership and asked to speak to him. He looked up and his eyes widened in shock. He recognized me immediately. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came to confront you," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I know what you've been doing. I know you're still conning people." He tried to deny it, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. I told him that I wasn't afraid of him anymore, that I had moved on with my life and was determined to stop him from hurting anyone else. I warned him that I would expose him if he didn't turn himself in. He laughed, a cold and cruel sound. He told me that I was naive, that he would never change. He said that he enjoyed conning people, that it was in his blood. I knew then that there was no reasoning with him. He was a lost cause. I turned and walked out of the dealership. I went straight to the local police station and told them everything. They were skeptical at first, but I showed them the evidence I had gathered. They agreed to investigate. A few days later, Mark was arrested again. He was charged with violating his parole and with new counts of fraud. He was sent back to prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. I felt a sense of closure. I had finally put an end to his reign of terror. I had faced my demons and emerged stronger than ever. I returned to Austin, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I continued my work with the organization, helping other victims of abuse and fighting for justice. I also started writing a book about my experience, hoping to inspire others to overcome their challenges and find their own strength. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had learned to love myself, to trust my instincts, and to stand up for what I believed in. And I was grateful for every day. One evening, I received a call from Alina. She told me that she was retiring and that she wanted me to take over her position as the head of the organization. I was honored and humbled. I knew that it was a big responsibility, but I was ready for it. I had dedicated my life to helping others, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I accepted the position, and I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. I expanded the organization's reach, creating new programs and initiatives to help even more victims of abuse. I became a leading voice in the fight against financial exploitation, advocating for stronger laws and greater awareness. And I never forgot the lessons I had learned from my own experience. I knew that it was possible to heal from trauma, to rebuild your life, and to find purpose in your pain. And I was determined to help others do the same. Years later, I received an anonymous letter. It was a confession from one of Mark's former accomplices, detailing all of his crimes and schemes. The letter revealed that Mark had been planning to target me again after his release from prison. He had been secretly tracking my movements and plotting his revenge. But his accomplice had had a change of heart and decided to warn me. I was shocked and horrified. I couldn't believe that he was still obsessed with me, even after all these years. I realized that I had never truly been safe, that he would always be a threat to me, but I refused to let him control me any longer. I decided to use this new information to expose him once and for all. I contacted the media and shared the letter with them. The story made national headlines, and Mark became a symbol of evil and deceit. His reputation was completely destroyed. He was ostracized by his family and friends, and he spent the rest of his days in prison, a broken and forgotten man. I had finally gotten my ultimate revenge. I had not only brought him to justice, but I had also exposed his true nature to the world. And I had done it all without compromising my own integrity or stooping to his level. I had risen above him, and I had emerged victorious. As I reflect on my journey, I realize that I owe everything to that mysterious stranger, Alina, who stepped into my life and saved me from destruction. She was my guardian angel, my mentor, and my friend, and I will never forget her kindness and her guidance. She taught me that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, and that with courage, determination, and the help of others, anything is possible. And so, I continue my work, helping others find their own strength and resilience, and fighting for a world where no one has to suffer the same fate as I did. Because I know that revenge is not always the answer. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living a good life, helping others, and making the world a better place. But sometimes, you have to fight back to stand up for yourself and to bring the perpetrators of evil to justice. And that is exactly what I did, and I am proud of it. Now, you might think that's the end of my story. I certainly did. Mark was in prison, his reputation ruined, and I was finally free to live my life in peace. But life, as it often does, had one more twist in store for me. A few years ago, I received a message through the organization's website. It was from a woman claiming to be Mark's daughter. I was stunned. I had no idea he had a child. She explained that she had been estranged from her father for years, disgusted by his behavior and his treatment of women. She had recently learned about my story and wanted to reach out to apologize for his actions. I was hesitant to meet her. I didn't know what to expect, but I decided to give her a chance. We met for coffee, and I was surprised by how genuine and remorseful she seemed. She told me that she had always known her father was a bad person, but she had never realized the extent of his cruelty. She had been living with the shame and guilt of his actions for years. As we talked, I began to see her as a victim of Mark as well. She had suffered because of his choices, just as I had. We formed an unlikely bond, united by our shared experience of being hurt by the same man. She became a valuable ally in my work, helping me to reach out to other victims of abuse and to educate the public about the dangers of financial exploitation. Together, we are working to create a world where no one has to suffer the same fate as we did. And that, I believe, is the greatest revenge of all. The twist, though, wasn't quite done. I thought I'd found peace, maybe even a strange kind of closure, but the universe, or perhaps something far more malevolent, had other ideas. It started subtly. Missed calls from unknown numbers, a fleeting glimpse of a familiar car in my rearview mirror, emails that felt just a little too personal. I tried to dismiss them as paranoia, the lingering effects of years spent looking over my shoulder. But the feeling persisted, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Then came the package. A small, unmarked box delivered to my office. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a single, wilted rose and a photograph. The rose was insignificant, easily dismissed. The photograph, however, was anything but. It was a picture of my apartment, taken from across the street, sometime within the last few days. Someone was watching me. The fear I thought I'd conquered resurfaced, stronger than ever. This wasn't random. This was calculated, deliberate. This was personal. I immediately contacted the police and my security team. They increased patrols around my home and office, installed additional surveillance cameras, and advised me to vary my routine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, that someone was playing a game with me, and I was the unwitting prey. I racked my brain, trying to figure out who could be behind this. Could it be one of Mark's old associates, seeking revenge for his downfall? Or perhaps another victim of his schemes, someone who blamed me for his imprisonment? I considered the possibility that Mark himself had somehow orchestrated this from behind bars, pulling strings even from within the prison walls. The possibilities were endless, and each one was more terrifying than the last. As the days turned into weeks, the incidents escalated. My car tires were slashed, my email account was hacked, and someone left a threatening note on my doorstep. The note was simple, but chilling. "I'm closer than you think." I knew I couldn't wait for the police to catch whoever was doing this. I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to delve into Mark's past, to uncover any secrets or enemies that might have emerged during his criminal career. I hired a team of private investigators, tasking them with digging up every detail of his life, from his childhood to his prison years. I pored over old documents, interviewed former associates, and even visited Mark in prison, hoping to glean some information from him, however reluctant he might be to provide it. Visiting him was a risk, I knew, but I was desperate. Seeing him again after all these years was unsettling. He looked older, more gaunt, but his eyes still held that same spark of malice. He denied any involvement in the harassment, claiming he had nothing to do with it. But I didn't believe him. I could see the satisfaction in his eyes, the subtle smirk that betrayed his true feelings. He was enjoying my fear, reveling in the knowledge that he was still able to torment me, even from behind bars. The investigation dragged on for months, turning up dead ends and false leads. Just when I was about to lose hope, one of my investigators uncovered a connection between Mark and a notorious crime family operating in the Southwest. It turned out that Mark had been involved in a money laundering scheme with the family years ago, and he had double-crossed them, stealing a large sum of money. The family had been looking for him ever since. Could they be behind the harassment? It seemed plausible. I decided to confront the head of the crime family, a ruthless and powerful woman named Isabella. I knew it was a dangerous move, but I was running out of options. I arranged a meeting through a mutual acquaintance, careful to conceal my true identity and purpose. Isabella was everything I expected and more. She was elegant, intelligent, and utterly devoid of compassion. She listened patiently as I laid out my suspicions, her eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she simply smiled and said, "I assure you, Ms. Smith, I have no interest in your personal affairs. Mr. Harding is of no concern to me." I didn't believe her, but I had no proof to the contrary. I left the meeting feeling defeated and frustrated. I was back to square one with no closer to identifying my tormentor. As I was driving home, I noticed a car following me. It was the same car I had seen in my rearview mirror several times before. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had been dreading. I tried to outrun the car, but it was no use. They were faster and more skilled than I was. They forced me off the road, crashing my car into a ditch. I was dazed and injured, but I managed to crawl out of the wreckage. As I stumbled away from the car, I saw a figure approaching me. It was a man, his face hidden in the shadows. He raised his hand, and I saw the glint of a knife. I braced myself for the end. But then a voice rang out from behind me. "Stop!" The man hesitated, turning to see who had spoken. It was Alina, my mentor, my friend, my guardian angel. She stood there, her eyes blazing with fury, a gun in her hand. "Get away from her," she said, her voice trembling with rage, "or I'll shoot." The man hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran. Alina rushed to my side, helping me to my feet. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm alive," I said, "thanks to you." She smiled. "I told you I'd always be there for you." As we waited for the police to arrive, Alina explained that she had been following me, suspecting that I was in danger. She had learned about the crime family's involvement in Mark's affairs and had feared that they might come after me. She had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to intervene. It turned out that Alina had been the one leaving the threatening notes and slashing my tires, all in an attempt to scare me into seeking protection. She had wanted to push me to trust her and to let her help me. While her methods were unorthodox, her intentions were pure. She had been trying to protect me, just as she had done years ago. As the police investigated, they discovered that the man who had attacked me was indeed connected to the crime family. He had been hired to intimidate me, to scare me into silence. But Alina's intervention had saved my life. I was shaken, but I was also grateful. I had once again escaped danger, thanks to the help of my guardian angel. I knew that I would never be truly safe, that there would always be threats lurking in the shadows. But I also knew that I was not alone. I had friends, allies, and a strength that I had never known I possessed. And I would continue to fight for justice, to protect others, and to live my life to the fullest, no matter what challenges came my way. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, I was finally learning how to write my own ending. The relief I felt after Alina's rescue was immense, but it was short-lived. The realization that I was still a target, that Mark's malevolence extended beyond prison walls, settled in like a stone in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that more danger was lurking around the corner. I was 28 years old, living in Austin, Texas, and instead of enjoying the city's vibrant culture, I was trapped in a nightmare created by a man I once loved. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I finally broke free for good. I had spent years rebuilding my life, piecing together the shattered remnants of my former self. I had a fulfilling career, a supportive network of friends, and a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. But Mark's shadow still loomed large, threatening to undo all the progress I had made. I refused to let that happen. I refused to let him control me any longer. I knew that I had to take proactive measures to protect myself and those I cared about. I couldn't rely solely on the police or even Alina and her organization. I needed to become my own protector, my own warrior. I started taking self-defense classes, learning how to disarm an attacker and defend myself in close combat. I also began researching security systems, upgrading the locks and alarms on my apartment, and installing hidden cameras to monitor my surroundings. I became hypervigilant, always scanning my environment for potential threats, always prepared to react. It was exhausting, living in a state of constant alert, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not for a single moment. As I delved deeper into Mark's past, I uncovered a web of deceit and betrayal that extended far beyond his relationship with me. I learned about his involvement in various scams and schemes, his connections to organized crime, and the countless lives he had ruined in his pursuit of wealth and power. I realized that I was not his only victim, that there were many others who had suffered at his hands, and I felt a responsibility to protect them, to ensure that he could never harm anyone again. I started reaching out to Mark's other victims, offering them support and guidance. I connected them with resources to help them heal from their trauma and rebuild their lives. I also encouraged them to come forward and share their stories, to expose Mark's crimes and bring him to justice. It was a difficult and emotional process, but it was also incredibly empowering. By working together, we were able to amplify our voices and hold Mark accountable for his actions. We filed lawsuits, launched media campaigns, and pressured law enforcement to investigate his crimes. Our efforts began to pay off. Mark's illegal activities were exposed, his assets were seized, and he was facing new charges that could keep him in prison for the rest of his life. But even as Mark's world crumbled around him, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still one step ahead. I knew that he was a master manipulator, capable of deceiving and manipulating even the most seasoned professionals. And I feared that he was plotting something, that he had a hidden agenda that I had yet to uncover. One day, I received a phone call from my private investigator. He told me that he had discovered something disturbing. Mark had been communicating with someone outside of prison, using a coded messaging system. The investigator had managed to decipher some of the messages, and they suggested that Mark was planning an escape. I was horrified. If Mark escaped from prison, he would be a grave danger to me and countless others. I knew that I had to stop him, no matter the cost. I immediately contacted the authorities, informing them of Mark's escape plot. They took the information seriously and launched an investigation. But I couldn't rely solely on them. I needed to take matters into my own hands. I decided to infiltrate Mark's inner circle, to get close to his confidants and uncover his escape plan. It was a dangerous and risky move, but I was determined to do whatever it took to protect myself and those I cared about. I started by contacting one of Mark's former associates, a low-level criminal named Frankie. Frankie had been involved in some of Mark's earlier scams, but he had since turned his life around. He was now working as a mechanic and trying to stay out of trouble. I knew that Frankie was still loyal to Mark, but I also believed that he had a conscience. I hoped that I could appeal to his sense of decency and convince him to help me. I met with Frankie at a diner on the outskirts of town. I told him about Mark's escape plot and the danger it posed to innocent people. I appealed to his sense of responsibility and asked him to help me stop Mark. Frankie was hesitant at first, but eventually he agreed to cooperate. He told me that Mark had been communicating with a corrupt prison guard who was helping him to plan his escape. The guard had been smuggling in tools and equipment that Mark needed to break out of his cell. Frankie also told me that Mark had a stash of money hidden outside of prison, which he planned to use to fund his escape and start a new life. I thanked Frankie for his help and promised to protect him from Mark's wrath. I then contacted the authorities, providing them with the information I had learned. They launched an investigation into the prison guard and the stash of money. But I knew that time was running out. Mark could escape at any moment. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I enlisted the help of Alina and her organization, and together we devised a plan to intercept Mark and prevent his escape. We knew that Mark would be heavily guarded, so we needed to be strategic and meticulous. We decided to set a trap for him, to lure him into a situation where we could apprehend him without risking anyone's lives. But as we finalized our plan, I received a disturbing message. Mark had learned about my involvement and was planning to retaliate. He had sent a hitman to kill me. My blood ran cold. I had known that Mark was dangerous, but I hadn't realized the extent of his ruthlessness. He was willing to kill me, just to silence me and escape from prison. I knew that I couldn't back down, that I had to confront Mark and stop him once and for all. But I also knew that I needed to protect myself from the hitman. I decided to go into hiding, to disappear from Mark's radar and wait for the right moment to strike. I left my apartment, packed a bag, and drove to a remote cabin in the mountains. I cut off all communication with the outside world, except for Alina and my private investigator. I spent my days practicing self-defense, sharpening my skills, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Mark. It was a lonely and isolating existence, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't afford to take any risks. After weeks of hiding, I received a message from Alina. The authorities had apprehended the corrupt prison guard and seized Mark's stash of money. Mark's escape plan had been thwarted, but the hit man was still at large. I knew that I couldn't stay in hiding forever. I had to come out of the shadows and confront Mark's assassin. I contacted my private investigator and asked him to track down the hitman. He told me that the hitman was a professional killer named Victor, known for his skill and ruthlessness. Victor had been hired by Mark to kill me and anyone who got in his way. I knew that confronting Victor would be the most dangerous thing I had ever done, but I also knew that I had to do it. I couldn't live in fear any longer. I had to face my demons and reclaim my life. I decided to set a trap for Victor, to lure him into a situation where I could confront him on my terms. I left a message for him, taunting him and challenging him to meet me at a secluded location. I knew that he wouldn't be able to resist the challenge. I prepared for the confrontation, honing my skills and sharpening my senses. I knew that this could be the end of the line, but I was ready to face whatever came my way. On the appointed day, I drove to the secluded location, a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. I parked my car, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The warehouse was dark and silent. I could feel Victor's presence lurking in the shadows. I drew my weapon and prepared for battle. Suddenly, Victor emerged from the darkness, his face hidden behind a mask. He was armed with a knife, his eyes cold and emotionless. "I've been waiting for you, Sarah," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Mark wants you dead." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm not afraid of Mark either." Victor lunged at me, his knife flashing in the darkness. I dodged his attack and retaliated with a swift kick to his chest. He stumbled backward, giving me time to draw my weapon. We circled each other, sizing each other up. I knew that this was going to be a fight to the death. Victor was a skilled killer, but I was determined to survive. He attacked again, his knife slashing at my face. I blocked his attack with my weapon and retaliated with a series of punches and kicks. We fought fiercely, exchanging blows, neither of us willing to give up. I could feel my strength waning, but I refused to surrender. I had come too far to give up now. Finally, I saw an opening. I seized the opportunity and landed a powerful blow to Victor's head. He staggered backward, his eyes glazed over. I followed up with a final kick to his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. He lay there motionless, defeated. I stood over him, panting, my body aching. I had won. I had defeated Mark's assassin, but I knew that the fight wasn't over. Mark was still out there, plotting his revenge. I had to find him and stop him, once and for all. I contacted the authorities and informed them of Victor's defeat. They arrived at the warehouse and took Victor into custody. I then turned my attention to Mark. I knew that he would be furious when he learned of Victor's failure. He would be desperate to retaliate. I decided to use his desperation against him. I sent him a message, taunting him and challenging him to meet me face to face. I knew that he wouldn't be able to resist the challenge. I set a trap for him, choosing a location that was familiar to him, a place where he felt comfortable and in control. It was the abandoned warehouse where he had once conducted his illegal activities. I knew that he would come there, expecting to find me alone and vulnerable. But I had a surprise waiting for him. The night I confronted Mark at the abandoned warehouse was the culmination of everything. It was the night I faced my deepest fears, the night I finally broke free from his control. The warehouse was just as I remembered it, cold, damp, and filled with the ghosts of past crimes. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the creaking of the old building and the pounding of my heart. I waited in the shadows, my weapon drawn, my senses on high alert. I knew that Mark would be coming, driven by his anger and his desire for revenge. But I was ready for him. I had spent months preparing for this moment, honing my skills and strengthening my resolve. I was no longer the naive and vulnerable woman he had once manipulated. I was a warrior, ready to fight for my life. Finally, I heard the sound of a car approaching. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the warehouse entrance. I held my breath as Mark emerged from the car, his face grim and determined. He was armed with a gun, his eyes filled with hatred. "Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with venom, "I've been waiting a long time for this." "The wait is over, Mark," I said, stepping out of the shadows. "It's time to end this." Mark raised his gun, aiming it at my head. "You ruined my life," he said. "You took everything from me." "You did this to yourself, Mark," I said. "You made your own choices." "I'm going to make you pay," he said. "I'm going to make you suffer." "You're not going to do anything," I said. "It's over, Mark." Mark fired his gun. The bullet whizzed past my head, narrowly missing me. I dove for cover, rolling behind a stack of crates. I returned fire, aiming for Mark's legs. He yelped in pain as the bullet hit its mark. He stumbled backward, dropping his gun. I emerged from behind the crates and advanced towards him, my weapon still drawn. "It's over, Mark," I said. "Give up." Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with rage and despair. He lunged at me, grabbing me by the throat. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. He squeezed my throat, cutting off my air supply. I could feel myself losing consciousness. Just when I thought I was about to die, I managed to reach for my weapon. I aimed it at Mark's chest and fired. The bullet pierced his heart. He gasped, his grip on my throat loosening. He collapsed to the ground, dead. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, my body trembling. I had done it. I had finally defeated Mark. I had broken free from his control. I had reclaimed my life. As the police arrived and took Mark's body away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. I was free to move on with my life, to rebuild and heal. In the aftermath of Mark's death, I spent months recovering from the trauma I had endured. I attended therapy, leaned on my friends and family, and focused on my work. I slowly began to heal, to put the pieces of my life back together. I also made a decision to dedicate my life to helping other victims of abuse. I joined Aliner's organization and became an advocate for survivors of domestic violence and financial exploitation. I traveled the country, sharing my story and inspiring others to break free from their abusers. I found purpose in my pain, using my experience to make a difference in the world. Years later, I received a letter from Mark's daughter. She told me that she was finally free from his influence and was building a new life for herself. She thanked me for bringing him to justice and for giving her the courage to move on. I was touched by her words. I knew that Mark's actions had affected many lives, but I was glad that something good had come out of the tragedy. I continued my work, helping others and fighting for justice. I knew that there would always be challenges and obstacles in my path, but I also knew that I was strong and resilient and that I could overcome anything. And so, my story comes to an end. It was a story of pain and suffering, but also a story of hope and resilience. It was a story of how I found my strength, how I fought for my freedom, and how I reclaimed my life. It was a story of revenge, but also a story of forgiveness and healing. And it was a story that I would never forget. But even as I thought I had finally closed the book on that chapter of my life, a new one was about to begin, a chapter filled with unexpected twists and turns, a chapter that would test my strength and resolve in ways I could never have imagined. A few weeks after the confrontation with Mark, I received a cryptic message from Aliner. She told me that she had uncovered some disturbing information about Mark's past, information that could have far-reaching consequences. She asked me to meet her at a remote location, a place where we could talk in private. I was intrigued and concerned. I trusted Aliner implicitly, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I had thought that I knew everything about Mark, but it seemed that there were still secrets lurking in the shadows. I met Aliner at the designated location, a secluded cabin in the woods. She was waiting for me, her face grave. "I have something to tell you, Sarah," she said. "It's about Mark." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I've discovered that Mark was not who he claimed to be," Aliner said. "He was living under an assumed identity. His real name was not Mark Harding." I was shocked. I had known Mark for years, but it seemed that I had never really known him at all. "Who was he?" I asked. "His real name was David Sterling," Aliner said. "He was a member of a powerful and dangerous crime syndicate." I gasped. This was more than I could have ever imagined. Mark was not just a con man and an abuser. He was a criminal connected to a vast network of organized crime. "What did he do?" I asked. "He was involved in money laundering, drug trafficking, and even murder," Aliner said. "He was a key player in the syndicate's operations." I was horrified. I had been involved with a monster, a man who had committed unspeakable crimes. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "I didn't want to scare you," Aliner said. "I thought it was best to protect you. But now you're telling me," I asked. "Because the syndicate is still out there," Aliner said, "and they know about you. They know that you were involved with Mark. They see you as a threat." I felt a chill run down my spine. I was not only a victim of Mark's abuse, but I was also a target of his criminal associates. My life was in danger. "What am I going to do?" I asked. "We need to protect you," Aliner said. "We need to get you out of the country into hiding." "I can't just run away," I said. "I have a life here. I have friends, family, a career." "It's not safe for you here," Aliner said. "You need to think about your safety." I thought about it for a moment. I knew that Aliner was right. I couldn't stay in Austin. I had to protect myself. "Okay," I said. "I'll go." "Good," Aliner said. "I'll make the arrangements. We'll get you out of here as soon as possible." Aliner arranged for me to be transported to a safe house in Europe. It was a remote location, far from the reach of the crime syndicate. I said goodbye to my friends and family, promising to stay in touch. It was a difficult and emotional farewell. I didn't know when or if I would ever see them again. I boarded a private plane and flew to Europe. I arrived at the safe house, exhausted and scared. It was a small, unassuming cottage in the countryside. I was alone, with no one to talk to, no one to rely on. I spent my days reading, writing, and trying to come to terms with what had happened. I missed my old life, but I knew that it was gone forever. I was now a fugitive, living in hiding, trying to stay one step ahead of the crime syndicate. After several months in hiding, I began to feel restless. I couldn't just sit there and wait for the syndicate to find me. I had to do something. I decided to use my skills and resources to fight back. I contacted Aliner and asked her to help me gather information about the crime syndicate. I wanted to know who they were, what they were doing, and how I could bring them to justice. Alina agreed to help. She used her connections to gather intelligence and feed it to me. I spent my days analyzing the information, piecing together the puzzle. I learned that the crime syndicate was led by a ruthless and powerful woman named Valentina. She was a cold and calculating criminal with a vast network of influence. She had been involved in organized crime for decades, and she had a reputation for being untouchable. I knew that taking down Valentina would be a difficult and dangerous task, but I was determined to do it. I had to stop her from hurting anyone else. I started to plan my attack. I knew that I couldn't confront Valentina directly. She was too well protected. I had to find a way to weaken her organization, to disrupt her operations, and to expose her crimes. I decided to target her financial assets. I knew that money laundering was a key part of the syndicate's operations. If I could disrupt their money laundering schemes, I could cripple their organization. I started investigating Valentina's financial dealings. I tracked her money flows, identified her shell companies, and uncovered her hidden accounts. I gathered evidence of her illegal activities and prepared to expose them to the authorities. But as I was about to launch my attack, I received a disturbing message from Alina. Valentina had learned about my investigation and was planning to retaliate. She had sent assassins to find me and kill me. I was in danger once again. I knew that I couldn't stay in the safe house any longer. I had to move to find a new place to hide. But I also knew that I couldn't run forever. I had to confront Valentina and end this once and for all. I decided to set a trap for her. I sent her a message, taunting her and challenging her to meet me face to face. I knew that she wouldn't be able to resist the challenge. I chose a location that was familiar to her, a place where she felt comfortable and in control. It was a secluded villa on the coast of Italy. I knew that she would come there, expecting to find me alone and vulnerable. But I had a surprise waiting for her. The Italian villa stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, a monument to Valentina's wealth and power. It was a place of opulence and decadence, but beneath the surface lurked a darkness that mirrored the soul of its owner. This was where our final confrontation would take place. This was where I would either triumph or fall. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying Valentina's habits, her weaknesses, and her strengths. I knew that she was a formidable opponent, but I was determined to bring her down. I had assembled a team of trusted allies, skilled professionals who shared my commitment to justice. Together, we had infiltrated Valentina's organization, gathering intelligence and preparing for the final showdown. As I waited for Valentina to arrive, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me to this point. I had been a victim, a survivor, and now, a warrior. I had faced my fears, overcome countless obstacles, and transformed myself into someone I never thought I could be. I was no longer the naive and vulnerable woman who had fallen prey to Mark's manipulations. I was a force to be reckoned with. Finally, I heard the sound of helicopters approaching. The lights of the aircraft pierced the darkness, illuminating the villa grounds. Valentina had arrived. I took a deep breath, steeled my nerves, and prepared for battle. Valentina emerged from the helicopter, surrounded by her bodyguards. She was a striking woman with a commanding presence and an air of icy detachment. She surveyed the scene, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. "I'm impressed, Sarah," she said, her voice smooth and seductive. "You have managed to lure me into your little trap." "It's not a trap, Valentina," I said. "It's justice." "Justice is a concept for the weak," she said. "I make my own rules." "Your rules end here," I said. Valentina smiled. "We shall see about that." She signaled to her bodyguards, who advanced towards me, weapons drawn. I nodded to my team, who emerged from their hiding places, ready to defend me. A fierce firefight erupted, bullets flying through the air, explosions rocking the villa. I moved with agility and precision, dodging attacks and returning fire. I was a skilled fighter, but Valentina's bodyguards were well-trained and heavily armed. I knew that I had to take down Valentina quickly if I wanted to survive. I fought my way through the chaos, closing the distance between me and Valentina. She watched me approach, her expression calm and unconcerned. "You are a fool, Sarah," she said. "You cannot defeat me." "I'm not afraid of you, Valentina," I said. "I'm going to stop you." Valentina drew a gun and aimed it at my head. "This is the end for you," she said. Just as she was about to pull the trigger, one of my team members tackled her from behind. Valentina dropped her gun and struggled to break free. I seized the opportunity and lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. I straddled her body, pinning her arms to the ground. "It's over, Valentina," I said. "You're finished." Valentina glared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You may have won this battle," she said, "but the war is far from over." "There is no war, Valentina," I said. "It ends here." I tightened my grip on her arms, preventing her from moving. My team members secured the remaining bodyguards, bringing the firefight to an end. Valentina was defeated. She was taken into custody by the authorities, along with her associates. Her crime syndicate was dismantled, her assets were seized, and her reign of terror was finally over. I stood there, watching as she was led away, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. I had done it. I had brought Valentina to justice. I had protected myself and countless others from her evil. The war was over. As the sun rose over the Italian coast, casting a golden glow on the villa, I knew that I had finally found peace. I had faced my demons, overcome my challenges, and emerged stronger than ever. I was Sarah, a survivor, a warrior, and a champion of justice. I had reclaimed my life, and as close to the end as possible, there could be an unexpected twist to leave a parting thrill. Years later, living a quiet life, I received a mysterious package. Inside was a single photograph. Valentina, years older, being escorted into a maximum security prison. But scrawled on the back was a single word: checkmate.